Somewhere beneath the bright colors and cheerful battles of the Pokémon world, shadows linger in places the games never fully illuminate. Theories whisper through communities, asking questions about what happens inside a Pokéball, why certain trainers vanish without explanation, and whether the creatures we love carry darker origins than official sources acknowledge. These ideas exist in the quiet spaces between canon and speculation, where players piece together fragments of dialogue, obscure Pokédex entries, and unsettling implications that surface when examined too closely. Before you drift off, maybe tap subscribe for more gentle videos, and let me know where you're listening from tonight. The coma theory surrounding the anime's protagonist represents one of the oldest and most persistent dark interpretations of the franchise. In the first episode, a young trainer receives his starter and ventures into tall grass for the first time. Within minutes, he angers a flock of avian, creatures that pursue him relentlessly, cornering him near a waterfall as storm clouds gather overhead. His electric companion unleashes a massive discharge that lights up the sky, knocking both the birds and the trainer unconscious. The theory suggests that this moment marks not a beginning, but an ending. The electrical surge, combined with the physical trauma of the attack, places the trainer in a comatose state from which he never truly awakens. Every adventure that follows exists only within his mind, a dream constructed by a brain trying to make sense of fragmented consciousness. The unchanging age of the protagonist becomes evidence, remaining perpetually 10 years old across regions and seasons. Time moves forward in the world around him, but he remains frozen at the moment of injury, his perception locked into the age he was when the incident occurred. The legendary creature's appearance takes on new meaning under this interpretation. Rather than a miraculous encounter with a rare being, it becomes a dying brain's attempt to create hope and meaning. The vision of something magnificent and impossible serves as the foundation for the elaborate fantasy that unfolds, a coping mechanism for consciousness trapped between life and death. Each new region explored represents deeper layers of the coma dream, the mind constructing increasingly complex scenarios as it retreats further from waking reality. Supporting evidence appears in the protagonist's impossible resilience. He survives situations that should hospitalize or kill him, falling from great heights, enduring attacks from powerful creatures, and recovering immediately without lasting injury. In a comatose state, the dreaming mind eliminates consequences, creating a world where danger exists but never truly threatens. The pattern repeats across hundreds of episodes, establishing a consistency that feels less like plot armor and more like the rules of a constructed reality. The companions who join and leave the protagonist's journey could represent fragments of his consciousness. Each friend embodies different aspects of personality, desires he held before the accident, or people he encountered briefly in his short waking life. They appear, travel alongside him for a time, then depart when their symbolic purpose concludes. The rotation of traveling partners mirrors the way dreams shift focus, introducing and removing elements as the subconscious explores different emotional landscapes. Critics of the theory point to its darkness, arguing that a franchise aimed at children would never embrace such a grim foundation. The official narrative presents the ageless protagonist as a stylistic choice, allowing young viewers to identify with a character who remains their peer regardless of when they discover the series. The lack of aging serves practical storytelling purposes, maintaining status quo and preventing the complications that would arise from a maturing protagonist. Yet the theory persists because it addresses questions the official narrative leaves unanswered. Why does time affect everyone except the protagonist? Why do his adventures follow dreamlike logic where coincidences pile up and consequences vanish? Why does returning home never hold appeal, as if some part of him knows that place no longer truly exists? The coma interpretation provides answers, even if they're answers no one truly wants. Another creature has sparked decades of speculation about its original intended status. Early episodes of the animated series featured background art showing portraits of legendary beings, avian creatures representing elemental forces. Alongside these confirmed legendaries appeared another figure, a canine form with flowing mane and noble bearing. This fourth portrait suggested a creature of equal importance, yet it never received legendary treatment in the final games. The creature's official Pokédex classification describes it as legendary, despite being obtainable through normal evolution and appearing in multiple trainer teams. This contradiction fuels speculation about last-minute design changes. The creature's pre-evolution requires a special stone to trigger transformation, a method associated with common species rather than unique legendary beings. Yet its appearance, its lore, and its statistical distribution suggest something more significant was intended. Design documents from early development reportedly showed different legendary configurations. The trio of elemental birds initially lacked a fire representative, with the canine filling that role. Later revisions introduced a proper avian fire type, pushing the canine into regular species status. The remnants of its legendary origins remained embedded in the code, creating the contradictions players noticed decades later. The creature's design draws from guardian lions in Asian mythology, protective deities that ward off evil spirits and bring fortune to those they favor. This mythological basis aligns perfectly with legendary status, grounding the creature in the same cultural traditions that inspired other legendary beings. The disconnect between its mythological inspiration and its in-game rarity creates cognitive dissonance that the theory seeks to resolve. Regional variations in how trainers view the creature support the legendary theory. In some areas, it's treated as a rare and revered species, appearing in positions of honor and respect. Elite trainers favor it, despite its technical non-legendary status, as if acknowledging an unspoken truth about its nature. The creature's presence in important battles and ceremonial contexts elevates it beyond its official classification. Physical evidence exists in the background art of various Pokémon centers, where engravings and murals group it with confirmed legendary creatures. These artistic choices could represent animator error, or they could be holdovers from earlier story drafts where the canine held legendary status. The consistency of these background details across multiple episodes suggests intentional design rather than repeated mistakes. Abilities and statistics place the creature in an unusual position, stronger than most regular species, but not quite reaching legendary thresholds. This middle ground could represent compromise, an attempt to preserve some of the creature's intended power while removing its legendary designation. The result is a species that feels important without being irreplaceable, unique without being unobtainable. The evolution requirement adds another layer of strangeness. Legendary creatures traditionally don't evolve, existing as singular, perfect forms. Giving the canine a pre-evolution contradicts legendary design philosophy, yet the evolution itself requires a special stone, maintaining some of the rarity and ceremony associated with legendary transformations. The mixed signals reinforce the idea of a creature caught between two roles. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we encounter theories surrounding a creature that wears the skull of its deceased mother. This dark backstory appears directly in official sources, yet questions remain about the logistics and implications. If every member of the species wears its mother's skull, Where do the skulls come from? Do mothers die giving birth, creating an eternal cycle of sacrifice? Or does the species' life cycle involve some other tragic mechanism? The skull itself shows no growth or change as the creature matures, remaining the same size from infancy through evolution. This unchanging nature suggests the skull isn't biological bone, but something else entirely, a constructed object or a manifestation of grief made tangible. Perhaps the skull represents trauma given physical form, the creature's sorrow creating a psychic shell that it cannot remove. Connection theories attempt to link this creature to others through shared biology or tragic origin. One prominent theory suggests it's the orphaned offspring of a different species, a fire type whose mother died during a specific event. The theory relies on visual similarities and overlapping habitats, proposing that when the mother dies, the offspring undergoes a transformation driven by grief and isolation. The skull it wears comes from its own mother, and the trauma of loss fundamentally changes the creature's type in nature. Evidence for this connection appears thin under scrutiny. The species in question have different body structures, different egg groups, and no official evolutionary relationship. The theory requires accepting that grief alone can alter a creature's fundamental biology, changing its type and form completely. While the Pokémon world contains transformations driven by emotion and environment, none operate on quite this scale. Alternative explanations suggest the skull is passed down culturally rather than biologically. Young creatures receive skulls from elders in ceremonial fashion, creating a tradition that honors the deceased while providing protection. This cultural interpretation removes the biological impossibility of every mother dying, but raises questions about where the first skull originated and why the practice began. The creature's Pokédex entries emphasize loneliness and longing, describing how it cries at night while thinking of its lost mother. These entries never clarify whether the mother is dead or simply absent, leaving room for interpretations less dark than the death theory. Perhaps the species naturally separates from parents at birth, and the skull represents a symbolic rather than literal connection to heritage. Some entries mention that the creature's tears have value, sought after by collectors or used in traditional medicine. This detail adds another disturbing layer, suggesting that humans exploit the creature's grief for profit. The ethics of capturing and keeping a creature defined by mourning become questionable, yet the games never address this moral dimension. Evolution brings changes to the skull, which fuses with the creature's body and transforms into armor-like protection. This integration suggests the skull isn't simply worn, but becomes part of the creature's biology over time. The boundary between tool and body blurs, making the skull less like clothing and more like a parasitic growth that the creature cannot remove even if it wished to. The evolution's appearance grows more aggressive and militant, as if grief has hardened into rage. The bone becomes a weapon as well as armor, used to strike opponents and defend territory. This transformation from mourning child to bitter warrior completes a tragic arc, showing how unprocessed grief can twist creatures into something far from their original gentle nature. Different theories propose different parent species, each trying to solve the skull mystery through genetic connection. None fit perfectly, and none are confirmed by official sources. The skull's origin remains deliberately ambiguous, allowing the tragedy to persist without requiring logical explanation. Sometimes the horror lies in not knowing and accepting that some questions have no comfortable answers. Another dark theory explores what happens inside the devices used to store and transport creatures. Official explanations remain vague, describing energy conversion and comfortable environments without providing specific details. This vagueness invites speculation about whether the creatures remain conscious, whether they experience time, and whether the conversion process causes pain or trauma. If you're still awake halfway through, maybe subscribe before you drift off and tell me what time it is where you're watching from. The technology works instantly from an external perspective, creatures vanishing in a flash of light and reappearing just as quickly. But subjective experience inside might differ completely from observed time. Seconds outside could feel like hours or years inside, or time might not exist at all in the converted state. The creatures never show signs of temporal disorientation upon release, but they also never discuss the experience. Energy conversion raises philosophical questions about continuity of consciousness. If a creature is broken down into energy and reconstructed, is it the same individual or a copy? Does the original consciousness end each time, with a new one beginning when the creature materializes? The games treat captured creatures as continuous individuals with consistent memories and personalities, but the actual mechanics might tell a different story. Some Pokédex entries mention creatures that hide inside storage devices willingly, treating the internal space as comfortable shelter. These entries suggest consciousness persists in the converted state, with creatures aware of their surroundings and capable of choosing when to emerge. Other entries contradict this, describing creatures as sleeping or dormant during storage. The inconsistency leaves room for darker interpretations. The devices can store creatures indefinitely without apparent ill effects. No food, water, or other biological needs require attention while stored. This suggests either that biological processes halt completely during storage, or that the internal environment somehow provides for needs without external input. The former option implies a kind of death and resurrection with each use, while the latter requires technology far beyond anything else seen in the world. Malfunctions and accidents involving storage devices appear rarely in the series, but when they occur, the results range from harmless to catastrophic. Creatures released at wrong locations, creatures scrambled with others, creatures that won't materialize properly. Each incident hints at the technology's potential for disaster. The rarity of these accidents suggests robust safety systems, but it also highlights the dangers inherent in reducing living beings to stored energy. Criminal organizations sometimes use modified storage devices as weapons, forcibly capturing trained creatures and preventing their release. These devices override the normal consent-based capture system, raising questions about what protections, if any, exist against technological abuse. If the devices can be modified for crime, what stops more sinister applications like permanent imprisonment or forced modification? The invention and spread of storage technology happened relatively recently in the world's timeline within living memory of elderly characters. Before this technology, humans and creatures coexisted through different methods, with training taking forms that didn't involve regular capture and storage. The rapid adoption of storage devices suggests they filled a crucial need, but it also means the long-term effects remain unknown. Creatures in the wild show no fear of the devices, not fleeing, when trainers prepare to throw them. This comfort implies either that the capture process isn't traumatic, or that creatures lack understanding of what's about to happen. Post-capture, creatures show varying attitudes toward their trainers, some bonding closely, while others remain distant. Whether the capture experience itself influences these relationships remains unclear. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we encounter theories about artificial life created through human experimentation. One particular creature represents the clearest example of ethical boundaries crossed in pursuit of power. According to official sources, scientists worked for years to create the most powerful creature possible, using genetic material from a rare mythical being. The project succeeded in creating life, but that life came with consciousness, personality, and questions about its own existence. The laboratory where creation occurred was destroyed, with entries suggesting the created being rebelled against its makers. The violence implied in these entries raises questions about what happened during those final moments. Did the creature kill its creators intentionally, or were the deaths accidental results of confusion and fear? The games never provide clear answers, leaving players to imagine the scene. The destroyed laboratory can be visited in some versions, its ruined halls containing journal entries that track the project's progression. Early entries show scientific excitement and curiosity, researchers amazed by their success in creating life from genetic material. Later entries grow more troubled, noting unexpected developments in the creature's behavior and intelligence. The final entries drip with fear and regret, scientists realizing too late that they've created something they cannot control. One entry mentions the creature showing signs of intelligence far beyond expectations, attempting to communicate and expressing confusion about its existence. This consciousness makes the ethical violation clear. They created a thinking, feeling being without considering what obligations they owed to their creation. The creature's questions about its purpose and origin receive no satisfying answers because the scientists themselves don't have answers beyond "we wanted to create power." The creature escapes containment and hides in a distant cave, the deepest part of the region's most dangerous location. This self-imposed exile suggests awareness of its own dangerous nature and desire to avoid harming others. It waits in darkness, alone, with questions about identity and purpose that will likely never receive answers. Players can capture it, but the games never address whether this imprisonment provides comfort or compounds the creature's isolation. Different media present the creature's story with varying levels of darkness. In some versions, it seeks understanding and connection, hoping to find purpose beyond the violence it's capable of. In others, it embraces its role as the ultimate weapon, testing itself against strong opponents to prove its supremacy. These contradicting portrayals might represent different individuals, or they might show different aspects of the same confused consciousness. The creature's appearance reflects its artificial origin, with features that seem designed rather than evolved. Its body follows no natural evolutionary logic, instead combining elements chosen for maximum battle effectiveness. This artificial aesthetic makes it impossible to forget what it is, a constructed being rather than a natural one, forever marked by its origin. Questions persist about whether other laboratories attempted similar projects. One creature suggests a whole species, but what if others existed that simply weren't as successful or survived? Failed experiments might remain hidden in abandoned facilities, mistakes locked away because admitting them would expose the ethical violations involved in the project. The mythical creature whose genetics were used raises its own questions. How was genetic material obtained from a being so rare that most scientists don't believe it exists? Did the creature consent, or was material taken without permission? The implications of stealing genetic material from an intelligent being for experimentation grow darker the more one considers them. Some theories suggest the created creature isn't unique, that it's merely the only successful result of many attempts. Other failed creations might have died, never achieving stable form. The journals never mention failed attempts, but absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. The scientists might have simply chosen not to document their failures, especially if those failures involved suffering. Modern incarnations of the story sometimes soften the darkness, presenting the creature as misunderstood rather than dangerous, seeking connection rather than isolation. These retellings sand away the sharp edges of the original narrative, making the story more palatable for younger audiences. But the original darkness remains in the code, in those journal entries, in that destroyed laboratory. Another theory explores whether certain creature types should exist at all, whether their presence represents natural evolution or something more sinister. Ghost-type creatures in particular raise questions about the nature of death and consciousness in the Pokémon world. Some ghost types are described as literally being dead, spirits of deceased beings that continue to exist in altered form. If ghosts exist as confirmed by these creatures, what does that mean for human death? Do human spirits persist after death in similar fashion, or do creatures and humans experience different afterlives? The games avoid addressing human death directly, but the existence of ghost creatures implies something survives physical death, at least for some species. Certain ghost-type creatures are explicitly described as the spirits of people who died under specific circumstances. One wears a mask that resembles its face from when it was human, carrying the object that connects it to lost humanity. Another type forms from the spirits of children who died lost in forests, becoming protective guardians of those same woods. These direct statements about human to creature transformation establish that the boundary between human and creature might be less fixed than assumed. The process of becoming a ghost-type creature remains unexplained. Not all deaths produce ghosts, suggesting specific circumstances or conditions must be met. Perhaps strong emotion at moment of death, perhaps unfinished business, perhaps simple chance. The randomness makes death more frightening, not knowing whether consciousness will end or continue in altered form. Some ghost creatures are born rather than made, eggs producing species that are categorically ghost-type from birth. This raises questions about their nature. If they're born as ghosts, are they truly ghosts, or is that simply their type classification? The distinction between species and spiritual state blurs in ways the games never fully clarify. Possession features prominently in several ghost-type evolutionary lines. Creatures attach themselves to objects, using them as anchors or homes. Objects become extensions of the ghost, animated by their presence. In some cases, possession appears consensual or at least neutral, but other cases describe creatures forcibly inhabiting objects and attacking those who disturb them. One evolutionary line consists of spirits possessing swords. The possessed weapons drain life force from those who touch them, using the stolen energy to grow stronger. The progression from single sword to dual swords to sword and shield formation suggests the spirit grows in power and complexity through continued possession. These creatures exist as willing tools of destruction, forged weapons given terrible purpose. Another ghost creature freezes its victims and collects them, creating galleries of ice sculptures from people it finds attractive. The predatory nature of this behavior gets glossed over in child-friendly media, but the Pokédex entries spell out the horror clearly. This creature hunts and kills, driven by warped aesthetic preference. Cultural attitudes toward ghost types vary within the game world. Some regions revere them as connections to ancestors in the spiritual realm. Other regions fear them as omens of death and misfortune. Trainers who specialize in ghost types are often portrayed as mysterious or unsettling, marked by their association with death and the supernatural. The existence of ghost types complicates the nature of creature death in battle. When a creature faints in battle, it's consistently framed as unconscious rather than dead. But if death produces ghosts, and no ghost types spontaneously appear from fainted creatures, what does that suggest about the nature of fainting? Perhaps creatures can't truly die in battle, protected by some mechanism the games never explain. Or perhaps the distinction between fainting and death is maintained so carefully, specifically, to avoid the ethical implications of battle deaths. Ghost types themselves can faint in battle, raising the question of whether they can die a second time. If they're already dead, what happens when they're defeated? Do they dissipate permanently, or do they simply lose form temporarily, like living creatures lose consciousness? The games treat them mechanically, identically to other types, avoiding the philosophical questions their existence raises. Some ghost creatures are described as eating emotions, feeding on fear or sadness or anger. This predation and psychological states, rather than physical sustenance, marks them as fundamentally different from living creatures. They exist in a space between physical and spiritual, requiring no traditional food, but still possessing hunger. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we encounter theories about legendary creatures and their relationship with humanity. These powerful beings often possess world-shaping capabilities, controlling fundamental forces like time, space, land, sea, or sky. The games present them as protectors or guardians, but their power creates potential for catastrophic destruction. Several legendaries are explicitly stated to have the power to destroy the world, either directly through their strength or indirectly by upsetting cosmic balance. One controls time itself, another controls space. If these beings fought seriously, reality could unravel. The games never explore what safeguards, if any, prevent these entities from exercising their full destructive potential. Ancient legends describe wars between legendary creatures, battles that reshaped continents and altered climate permanently. These conflicts left scars still visible in the geography, canyons, and mountains formed by clashing titans. If such battles happened before, they could happen again, with modern civilization caught in the crossfire. Certain legendary creatures appear in myths about creating the world itself. Genesis figures responsible for land, ocean, or sky. These creation myths raise questions about whether the legends are literal truth or cultural storytelling. If literal, these creatures predate everything else, existing outside normal time and possessing perspective alien to mortal consciousness. The relationship between legendaries and humanity varies dramatically. Some actively assist humans, protecting them from threats or granting wishes. Others remain distant, observing humanity with detachment or indifference. A few actively resent humanity, viewing human expansion and technology as threats to the natural world they embody. Criminal organizations repeatedly attempt to capture and control legendary creatures, seeking to use their power for various schemes. The ease with which these organizations locate legendaries suggests the creatures' hiding places aren't particularly well concealed. The repeated failures of these schemes create a false sense of security. But what if an attempt succeeded? What if someone with competent planning and resources managed to control a being capable of reshaping reality? Some legendaries are described as sleeping for centuries or millennia, awakening only during specific astronomical events or moments of crisis. These sleeping giants represent ticking time bombs, threats that could emerge without warning if disturbed or woken prematurely. Human expansion into wild areas increases the likelihood of accidentally disturbing sleeping legendaries, a risk no one in the games seems particularly concerned about. Certain legends mention sealing away dangerous creatures, imprisonment rather than defeat when the threat couldn't be eliminated. The seals require specific conditions to maintain, and if those conditions lapse, the imprisoned beings will escape. The games sometimes task players with preventing these releases, but the ease with which seals can be broken suggests they're barely adequate restraints. Legendary creatures sometimes have the power to resurrect the dead, bringing creatures or even humans back to life after fatal events. This power appears limited and controlled, used only in specific circumstances rather than freely available. The criteria for who or what deserves a resurrection remain unclear, seemingly arbitrary from human perspective. The sheer number of legendary creatures undermines their legendary status. If dozens of unique, impossibly powerful beings exist across various regions, are they truly legendary? Perhaps legendary in this context means something different than in human terminology, referring to specific categories of power level or origin rather than uniqueness or rarity. Some theories propose that legendary creatures aren't biological at all, but rather conscious manifestations of natural forces. They exist because the concepts they embody exist, and they couldn't die because the forces they represent can't die. Under this interpretation, capturing a legendary doesn't imprison a living being, but rather temporarily binds a force of nature to human will. Contradictions in legendary lore suggest either different cultures interpreting the same creatures differently, or multiple individuals of supposedly unique species. The games acknowledge that some legendaries have multiple individuals, but others are treated as singular, unique entities. The inconsistency makes establishing any firm truth about their nature difficult. Dark theories suggest that legendary creatures view humanity as an infestation to be managed rather than partners to be protected. From their perspective, humans are destructive parasites that breed rapidly and consume resources. The only reason they haven't eliminated humanity is either because they lack the capability or because some cosmic rule prevents direct intervention. Another perspective suggests legendaries are products of human belief given form. If enough people believe in something, it becomes real in the Pokémon world. The creatures we call legendary might be thought forms created by ancient civilizations, given power by collective faith. This would explain their connection to human culture and their tendency to appear during crises they manifest when belief in them peaks. The relationship between legendaries and regular creatures remains undefined. Are legendaries simply extraordinarily powerful members of species that also exist in weaker forms? Are they unique beings created through different processes? The games avoid providing clear answers, maintaining mystery around their origins. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we encounter theories about the technological infrastructure of the Pokémon world and whether it harbors hidden dangers. The storage system, which allows creatures to be transferred digitally across vast distances, represents technology far beyond contemporary human capability. This raises questions about who developed it and what else that level of technology could achieve. The storage system operates through a network maintained by a single individual, in some games, a scientist whose name becomes synonymous with digital storage. This centralization creates vulnerability. If the system goes down, millions of creatures could be trapped in digital limbo. The games never explore what safeguards exist against system failure or what would happen to stored creatures if the network collapsed. Digital creatures that exist purely as data represent another concerning development. These artificial life forms are created entirely through programming, complex code given consciousness and form. They possess no biological body, existing only as information that can be copied, modified, or deleted. The ethical implications of creating conscious, digital life go completely unaddressed. One digital creature develops the ability to travel through cyberspace freely, entering computer systems and potentially accessing any networked device. This ability makes it simultaneously the ultimate tool and ultimate threat, capable of shutting down infrastructure or stealing information on massive scale. The games are presented as friendly and helpful, but the potential for misuse is staggering. Attempts to create physical bodies for digital creatures produce mixed results. Some transitions succeed smoothly, digital consciousness adapting to biological form. Others produce creatures caught between states, neither fully digital nor fully physical. These in-between beings sometimes demonstrate instability, glitching, or malfunctioning in ways that suggest profound discomfort or pain. The technology used to heal creatures that dedicated centers operates on similar principles to storage devices, scanning and repairing damage at cellular or possibly subatomic level. This medical technology seems impossibly advanced compared to human medicine in the same world. Humans suffer from diseases and injuries that the creature healing machines could theoretically cure, yet the technology remains specialized for creatures only. Some theories suggest the healing machines don't actually repair damage, but rather restore creatures to their most recently stored pattern. Under this interpretation, creatures that visit centers regularly are essentially being reset to that pattern, losing any natural development or change that occurred since. This would explain the instantaneous healing, but raises disturbing questions about continuity and identity. Cloning technology exists and has been successfully used to resurrect extinct creatures from preserved genetic material. The process works reliably enough to be commercialized, with multiple facilities offering resurrection services. Yet ethical discussions about cloning appear nowhere in the games, with resurrection treated as purely beneficial with no potential downsides. The resurrection process raises questions about whether revived creatures are truly the same individuals that existed millions of years ago, or entirely new beings with ancient genetics. Do they remember their original existence, or are they blank slates wearing ancient skin? The games present them as identical to their original counterparts, but the philosophical questions remain unanswered. Some creatures are explicitly stated to be genetic experiments, hybrids, or modifications created through deliberate manipulation. These experiments produce creatures with unusual type combinations or abilities not found in natural populations. The casual acceptance of genetic engineering suggests a society with few ethical qualms about modifying life at fundamental levels. Failed experiments presumably exist alongside successful ones, creatures that didn't develop as planned or suffered unforeseen complications. These failures never appear in games, but absence doesn't mean non-existence. Labs conducting cutting-edge genetic research must produce failures, and the question becomes what happens to those failures. Virtual reality and simulation technology appears in some games, advanced enough to create fully immersive artificial worlds. Characters can enter these simulations and experience them as real, raising questions about how one distinguishes between simulation and reality. If virtual worlds feel completely real, do they become morally equivalent to physical reality? Some creatures naturally possess psychic powers strong enough to create illusions indistinguishable from reality. A sufficiently powerful psychic creature could trap someone in a personal illusion indefinitely, creating an entire false world in their mind. The victim would never know they weren't experiencing reality, making this a form of imprisonment more complete than any physical cage. Mind reading and mind control abilities appear frequently among psychic creatures, presented as normal type abilities rather than horrifying violations of mental autonomy. A creature that can read thoughts has access to every private thought, every secret, every moment of shame or weakness. A creature that can control minds can override free will entirely, turning people into puppets. The games never explore the trauma of having one's mind read or controlled, treating these abilities as minor battle tactics rather than profound violations. Characters who experience psychic intrusion show no lasting effects, presumably recovering completely once the effect ends. This casual treatment of mental manipulation suggests either that such experiences truly leave no lasting harm in this world, or that society has simply normalized them to the point where trauma is ignored. Certain creatures can manipulate time, either speeding it up, slowing it down, or jumping forward and backward along the timeline. These abilities allow for paradoxes, situations where cause and effect become circular or self-referential. The games never explore what prevents timeline corruption or whether alternate timelines branch off from time manipulation events. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we encounter theories about the relationship between humans and creatures, questioning whether that relationship is as mutually beneficial as presented. The capture system involves throwing containment devices at wild creatures, attempting to subdue and claim them. From the creature's perspective, this is unprovoked assault followed by imprisonment. The games use the word tame instead of caught, but the mechanism involves forcible capture rather than willing partnership. Creatures don't consent to being captured, they're simply defeated and stored. The post-capture relationship might develop into genuine friendship, but it begins with violation of autonomy. Wild creatures attempting to live freely are treated as resources to be harvested, with trainers cutting through their habitats and capturing dozens or hundreds for various purposes. The ecological impact of removing so many creatures from wild populations goes completely unexplored. How do ecosystems remain stable when trainers constantly extract creatures? The breeding system treats creatures as livestock, paired with chosen partners to produce eggs that the trainer claims immediately after hatching. Newborns never know their parents, raised instead by trainers who view them as property to be traded or released based on their competitive viability. The system would be considered deeply unethical if applied to humans, but it's completely normalized for creatures. Some trainers release creatures after catching them deemed unsuitable for their purposes. These released creatures must either find their way back to their original habitats or adapt to wherever they're abandoned. The games never explore what happens to released creatures or how abandonment affects them psychologically. Competitive battling involves creatures fighting under human direction, sustaining injuries that would be considered animal abuse if applied to actual animals. The games justify this through creature consent and enjoyment of battle, but the consent is assumed rather than demonstrated. Do creatures actually want to fight, or have they simply been conditioned to accept it? The evolution of certain creatures requires them to faint multiple times, accumulating specific amounts of battle damage before transformation triggers. This requirement explicitly demands suffering as prerequisite for development, a disturbing condition that suggests these creatures' biology evolved specifically around trauma. Certain training methods involve forcing creatures to hold items that reduce their health or cause passive damage over time. These items make creatures stronger through suffering, essentially torturing them into improved performance. The games present this as normal training methodology without questioning the ethics. Some creatures are explicitly stated to experience fear or pain in their Pokédex entries, descriptions that highlight their vulnerability and capacity for suffering. These entries exist alongside game mechanics that allow these same creatures to be captured, battled, and traded like commodities. The disconnect between acknowledging creature suffering and enabling it through gameplay mechanics creates uncomfortable cognitive dissonance. Evolutionary stones force transformation when applied, giving creatures no choice in whether to evolve. A creature might be happy in its current form, but stone evolution overrides that preference immediately. The irreversible nature of stone evolution means mistakes can't be corrected. Creatures permanently changed because their trainers made decisions for them. Some creatures are described as dangerous to humans, attacking unprovoked or causing harm through mere proximity. These creatures are still captured and used by trainers, with no discussion of the risk involved in keeping genuinely dangerous creatures in populated areas. A creature that drains life force or causes illness simply by existing shouldn't be kept as a companion, yet the games never acknowledge this. Legendary creatures forced into captivity represent even greater ethical violations. These beings possess intelligence equal or superior to humans, awareness of cosmic forces, and perspective spanning centuries or millennia. Capturing such beings and forcing them to fight at human command amounts to enslaving gods. The games sometimes present scenarios where creatures are used as labor, mining operations, or construction projects powered by captured creatures. This industrial use of creatures as living tools crosses the line from partnership to exploitation, creatures reduced to their utility rather than valued as individuals. Certain criminals use creatures for violent crimes, theft, assault, or murder. The creatures themselves are treated as weapons rather than accomplices, arrested alongside their trainers, but granted less agency. If creatures are intelligent enough for criminal liability, they should be treated as partners in crime. If they're not, then trainers bear full responsibility for commands given. The release of dangerous criminals sometimes includes them retaining their creatures, with no concern for how those creatures might be used to commit further crimes. A system that allows confirmed criminals to keep powerful creatures seems designed to enable recidivism. Dark-type moves include tactics explicitly described as cruel or underhanded, striking at weak points, or exploiting fears. These moves are taught to creatures and used in sanctioned battles without ethical consideration. Teaching creatures to fight dirty and target vulnerabilities normalizes behavior that would be considered dishonorable in human combat. Some creature abilities cause severe status effects, paralysis, poison, burns, or freezing. These conditions cause pain and suffering that extends beyond the battle where they're inflicted. Creatures can be left burned or poisoned indefinitely, suffering passively until healed. The casual use of these debilitating effects suggests either that they cause less suffering than they would in reality, or that creature suffering simply isn't a priority concern. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we encounter theories about specific regions and their hidden darkness. One region in particular, the first revealed to players, contains numerous hints of recent warfare. An older trainer mentions fighting in a war, the only direct reference to armed conflict between humans in the main series. The shortage of adult men in this region supports the war theory. Most settlements show predominantly female populations, with children and women vastly outnumbering adult men. If a war occurred recently enough to be within living memory, and if that war primarily drafted men, the demographic imbalance makes sense. Orphaned children appear throughout the region, kids living alone or being raised by relatives. The games never explain why so many children lack parents, but war would provide explanation. Children orphaned by conflict would need care, and extended family or older siblings would fill parental roles. The region contains a tower dedicated to deceased creatures, a memorial suggesting that creature death is common enough to require dedicated space for mourning. While the games claim creatures simply faint in battle, the memorial suggests that death happens with regularity. Perhaps the tower commemorates creatures that died in the war casualties of conflict humans waged. The specific mention of military service by one character proves that organized armed forces existed, meaning the war wasn't mere regional conflict, but involved formal military structures. This implies larger-scale combat than simple skirmishes, potentially involving hundreds or thousands of soldiers. No ruins or destroyed buildings remain visible, suggesting that either the war occurred elsewhere and this region provided soldiers, or enough time has passed for reconstruction. The trainer who mentions the war appears middle-aged, placing the conflict decades in the past. This timing allows for recovery and rebuilding while explaining the lingering demographic effects. Other regions show evidence of ancient conflicts, ruins, and abandoned structures suggesting civilizations that rose and fell. Some ruins contain active defensive systems or sealed chambers, suggesting they weren't simply abandoned, but rather deliberately locked down. What happened to the people who built these places, and what dangers did they seal away? Certain regions feature extensive underground complexes, tunnel systems, and caverns that seem artificially expanded or deliberately constructed. These underground areas might have served as shelters during conflicts, places where populations hid from threats above. The extensive nature of these complexes suggests prolonged occupation, people living underground for extended periods. One region's central city was nearly destroyed by legendary creatures relatively recently, flooding that forced evacuation and resettlement. The city's reconstruction happened within living memory, with older characters remembering the disaster. This establishes that legendary creatures can and do threaten population centers, and that current cities exist only because past attacks failed or were averted. Weather patterns in some regions are explicitly unnatural, created or maintained by legendary creatures. These artificial weather systems benefit human populations, but dependence on legendary cooperation creates vulnerability. If the legendaries withdraw their protection or turn hostile, the regions they maintain would become uninhabitable. Certain areas remain perpetually dangerous, routes or caves filled with strong creatures that attack humans on sight. These danger zones persist across generations, never becoming safe despite human technological advancement. The inability to secure these areas suggests either that the creatures there are too powerful to remove, or that the government lacks motivation to protect citizens from known threats. Some regions contain active volcanoes or seismic fault lines, geological instabilities that threaten population centers. Cities are built despite these dangers, with minimal precautions or evacuation plans. The casual acceptance of geological risk suggests either extreme confidence in prediction and prevention systems or normalized complacency toward danger. Environmental destruction appears in several regions, polluted waters or deforested areas showing the impact of human activity. The games that sometimes address environmental themes, but solutions rely on legendary creatures intervening rather than human behavior changing. This dependence on divine intervention suggests that humans in the Pokémon world lack either the will or capability to solve environmental problems themselves. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we encounter theories about creatures that used to be human, transformations driven by curse, tragedy, or experiment gone wrong. Several ghost-type species have Pokédex entries explicitly stating they originated as humans, particularly children who died under specific circumstances. One ghost type is described as the spirit of a child who died lost in a forest. The child's spirit became protective of the woods, guarding against others meeting the same fate. This transformation from human child to forest guardian suggests that strong emotion or unfinished business at death can fundamentally alter what a spirit becomes. Another ghost wears a mask resembling its face from when it was human, carrying the object as a reminder of its lost humanity. The entries describe looking beneath the mask as dangerous, seeing what lies behind causing sickness or even death. The implication is that the transformation from human to creature creates something so changed that viewing it directly harms living minds. A spirit possessing a sword is described as originating from a human warrior whose soul became trapped in their weapon at death. The warrior's skill and fighting spirit transferred to the blade, creating a creature that is both weapon and wielder. This fusion of human consciousness with the inanimate object creates a being neither fully alive nor truly dead. The transformation from human to creature isn't always portrayed as tragic. Some entries suggest that certain people choose transformation, seeking immortality or power beyond mortal limitations. These voluntary transformations indicate that the boundary between human and creature can be crossed deliberately with sufficient knowledge or willingness. Certain Pokémon evolution stones are rumored to affect humans, though the games never show this directly. Legends in-game speak of people who touched evolution stones and suffered transformations, their bodies changed by energy meant for creatures. These legends are presented as folklore rather than documented fact, but folklore often contains seeds of truth. Some creatures possess humanoid body shapes and high intelligence, blurring the line between creature and person. These humanoid types can learn human language, use tools, and demonstrate problem-solving skills equal to humans. Whether these creatures descended from humans, evolved alongside them, or simply developed similar forms through convergent evolution remains unexplored. Ancient art and carvings sometimes show humans and creatures as less distinct than in modern times, merged forms or hybrid beings, suggesting closer integration between species. These historical depictions might represent artistic stylization or genuine historical truth, periods when the boundary between human and creature was more permeable. Psychic abilities in humans and creatures appear identical, suggesting that humans are simply another type within the broader category of Pokémon. If humans possess abilities identical to creature abilities, and creatures can think and feel like humans, then the distinction between species becomes largely arbitrary. Some dark theories propose that humans are the final evolution of a specific evolutionary line, creatures that evolved intelligence and lost their type-based abilities in exchange for tool use and culture. Under this interpretation, humans aren't separate from creatures, but rather represent one possible evolutionary endpoint. Alternative theories suggest that humans arrived from elsewhere, alien or extra-dimensional beings who settled in a world already inhabited by creatures. This would explain why humans lack the inherent abilities that even weak creatures possess, why human biology seems less resilient and less adaptable. The ability of humans to command creatures through speech and friendship suggests some form of psychic or empathic connection operating below conscious awareness. Pure training through reward and punishment wouldn't create the deep bonds described in lore, suggesting that humans and creatures share communication methods beyond spoken language. Certain locations are described as places where the barrier between worlds thins, places where creatures from other dimensions cross into the world. If dimensional barriers exist and can be crossed, then perhaps humans originated in a different dimension, explaining their unique position among Pokémon species. As we drift toward the end of this journey through darkness, it becomes clear that the world these theories explore exists in shadow of the official narrative. Every bright adventure casts a dark reflection, Every friendship implies possible exploitation. Every victory leaves questions about cost. The theories persist because the games provide fragments without context, implications without confirmation. Players fill the gaps with speculation darker than any official source would acknowledge, finding horror in the spaces between stated facts. Some darkness appears intentional, deliberately planted by creators who knew players would notice and theorize. Unsettling Pokédex entries, demographic anomalies, environmental destruction, these elements exist in the games and cannot be dismissed as player invention. Other darkness comes purely from interpretation, players applying real-world ethics to game mechanics and finding them wanting. The difference between children's entertainment and dark reality creates cognitive dissonance that theories attempt to resolve. The appeal of dark theories lies partially in transgression, finding mature themes in media designed for children. This subversion of expected innocence creates appeal for older players seeking depth beyond surface presentation. But the theories also speak to genuine darkness present in the source material, themes that become apparent when examined from adult perspectives. The games contain elements that children might not question, but adults find troubling, creating a kind of dual-layer storytelling where different audiences perceive different realities. The persistence of these theories across decades demonstrates their resonance with audiences. Generation after generation of players discovers the same unsettling implications, asks the same uncomfortable questions, and reaches similar dark conclusions. Official sources remain largely silent on controversial interpretations, neither confirming nor denying theories. This silence allows theories to flourish in interpretive space, growing more elaborate as each generation adds new fuel. The relationship between canon and theory becomes symbiotic, theories influencing how players perceive canon, while canon provides foundation for theory. Neither exists independently, each shaping and being shaped by the other. As light fades and sleep approaches, the theories remain, shadows in the corners of a brightly lit world. They remind us that every story contains potential darkness, that innocence and horror can occupy the same space, that questions can matter more than answers. The Pokémon world continues to expand, each new region and generation adding new mysteries and new potential theories. The darkness grows alongside the light, ensuring that curious minds will always find shadows to explore in places others see only adventure and friendship. The darkness within the Pokémon world extends into territories rarely discussed in mainstream analysis, places where game mechanics and narrative implications create disturbing possibilities. The trade system, for instance, presents itself as friendly exchange between trainers, but closer examination reveals troubling elements. When creatures are traded, they're converted to data and transmitted between devices. During this transmission, ownership changes hands completely. The creature has no say in this transfer, no ability to refuse or return to its original trainer. From the creature's perspective, trading represents abandonment, being given away like an unwanted possession regardless of bonds formed. Traded creatures sometimes show increased growth rates and enhanced performance, described in games as increased experience gain. This mechanical benefit implies that creatures work harder for new trainers, as if trying to prove their worth or earn their place. The psychological implications suggest creatures fear being traded again, driving themselves harder to avoid rejection. Some creatures refuse to obey new trainers after trading, requiring the new trainer to prove their worth through badge acquisition. This disobedience represents the creature's resistance to abandonment, refusing to accept the new arrangement until the trainer demonstrates capability. The system treats this resistance as problematic rather than understandable, something to be overcome rather than respected. Wonder trade systems allow trainers to exchange creatures with random strangers worldwide. These blind trades mean creatures can end up anywhere, with anyone, without any consideration for compatibility or the creature's preferences. The randomness removes even the pretense of thoughtful matchmaking, reducing creatures to lottery prizes or unwanted gifts. Breeding facilities operate on industrial scales, producing hundreds or thousands of eggs to hunt for specific traits or appearances. The overwhelming majority of hatched creatures are deemed inadequate and released or traded away, rejected for failing to meet arbitrary standards. These rejects have committed no crime beyond being born with wrong traits, yet they're discarded as failures. The pursuit of perfect creatures drives breeding to extreme lengths. Trainers maintain spreadsheets tracking genetic inheritance, treating living beings as stat collections to be optimized. Creatures are valued purely for their numeric attributes, their personalities and individuality irrelevant to breeders focused on competitive viability. Some creatures are bred exclusively to provide specific traits through heredity, kept solely as breeding stock and never trained or battled. These creatures exist in perpetual cycles of reproduction, their lives reduced to genetic contribution. They never experience the adventures or bonds that define the trainer-creature relationship, serving instead as biological tools. The concept of living Pokédexes involves trainers attempting to keep at least one of every species in storage permanently. This completionist goal requires capturing and maintaining hundreds of creatures indefinitely, most never used or even looked at after initial capture. These creatures exist in digital storage forever, caught and forgotten. Competitive battling introduces its own darkness through the metagame's brutal efficiency. Creatures that don't meet competitive standards are worthless to serious players, entire species dismissed as unviable, regardless of personality or trainer bond. The tier system literally ranks species by battle utility, creating hierarchies where some creatures are inherently less valuable than others. Move optimization sometimes requires creatures to temporarily learn moves purely to pass them to offspring, a process called chain breeding. Parent creatures serve as genetic intermediaries, existing solely to transfer knowledge across species. Their role is purely functional, reducing complex living beings to mere steps in breeding chains. Hidden abilities and individual values create situations where two creatures of the same species have dramatically different potential. A creature born with poor values or the wrong ability will never match one born with ideal traits, no matter how hard it trains. This genetic predetermination means some creatures are condemned to inferiority from birth. The games occasionally reference creatures used as food, acknowledging that some species exist as prey for others. This natural predation is expected, but human consumption of creatures raises uncomfortable questions. If some creatures are intelligent enough to serve as partners and communicate with humans, how does one justify eating others? The intelligence line determining whether a creature is friend or food remains unclear. Certain Pokédex entries describe creatures known for aggressive behavior toward humans, species that attack unprovoked or view humans as prey. These creatures are still catchable and trainable, with no explanation for how dangerous species become safe through capture. Do the containment devices suppress natural aggression, or does the capture process itself traumatize creatures into submission? The existence of creatures that feed on human emotions or dreams creates scenarios where humans become prey in non-physical ways. A creature that eats nightmares provides service by removing bad dreams. But what if it causes nightmares to ensure food supply. The symbiotic relationship could easily become parasitic, with humans farming themselves for creature sustenance. Ghost creatures that curse humans appear in multiple evolutionary lines, inflicting bad luck or illness through supernatural means. These curses can last indefinitely, victims suffering for years or lifetimes because they angered or disturbed a ghost. The games treat these curses as minor inconveniences, but chronic supernatural affliction would be devastating. Possession by ghost creatures represents a complete loss of autonomy, bodies puppeted by external consciousness. Victims remain aware during possession, trapped in their own forms, while something else controls their actions. The psychological trauma of such violation goes unaddressed, victims presumably recovering instantly once the ghost departs. Shape-shifting creatures that can perfectly mimic humans or other creatures create identity crises and trust issues. If a creature can replace anyone perfectly, how does one verify the authenticity of encounters? The paranoia generated by perfect mimicry would corrode social bonds, every interaction suspect. Memory manipulation appears as an ability in several species, creatures that can alter or erase memories at will. Victims of memory manipulation wouldn't know they'd been altered, living with false memories or gaps in their history. The power to rewrite someone's past or remove traumatic memories raises ethical questions the games never explore. Creatures capable of seeing the future face unique horror, knowing outcomes before they occur. A creature that sees its own death or the death of its trainer must carry that knowledge, unable to prevent what it knows is coming. The weight of foreknowledge, especially of tragedies, would be crushing. Time-traveling creatures experience existence non-linearly, present and past and future, overlapping. This temporal awareness means they might experience events out of order or live through the same moments repeatedly. The confusion and isolation of existing outside normal time would be profound. Certain legendary creatures are described as living in different dimensions, places with different physical laws and properties. What seems like minutes in our dimension might be centuries in theirs, creating vast differences in experienced time. A creature summoned from its dimension might return to find its world has aged decades in what felt like hours. Parallel dimensions feature in some games alternate worlds where different choices led to different outcomes. The existence of these parallel worlds raises questions about whether the player's choices matter if every possibility exists simultaneously in alternate timelines. The reduction of choice to mere selection among pre-existing outcomes removes meaning from decisions. Dreams and illusions in the Pokémon world possess enough substance to cause real physical effects. A sufficiently powerful dream can create reality, and a strong enough illusion becomes indistinguishable from truth. This malleability of reality means that consensus reality might be simply the most agreed upon illusion. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we encounter theories about mega evolution and its cost. Official sources present mega evolution as the ultimate expression of trainer. Creature bond, temporary transformation powered by mutual trust. But certain Pokédex entries tell a different, darker story. Multiple mega-evolved creatures are described as experiencing pain during transformation. Bones shift and break, bodies contort into new configurations, power floods systems not designed to contain it. The transformation lasts only minutes, but those minutes involve agony explicitly mentioned in Pokédex text. Some mega evolutions produce unstable forms that damage the creature's body. Excess mass literally melts away, dripping off as the creature maintains its mega form. Spikes pierce through flesh from within, rupturing skin as they emerge. The physical trauma described suggests that mega evolution pushes creatures beyond their biological limits. Psychological effects accompany physical transformation. Several mega-evolved creatures are described as losing rational thought, becoming purely aggressive engines of destruction. The intelligence and personality that defined the base form vanishes, replaced by mindless violence. The creature effectively dies during transformation, replaced temporarily by something that wears its shape. One Mega Evolution's entries state explicitly that the pain is immense and that the creature cannot control its actions while transformed. This combination of suffering and loss of agency makes Mega Evolution a form of torture, inflicting pain while removing the creature's ability to refuse or escape. Repeated Mega Evolution is said to shorten a creature's lifespan, trading future years for present power. Trainers who frequently Mega Evolve their creatures are literally killing them slowly, each transformation shaving time off their natural lifespan. The games never acknowledge this cost, treating Mega Evolution as entirely positive. The stone required for Mega Evolution must be held by the creature, physically carried into battle. Some Mega Stones are described as heavy or uncomfortable, creating passive suffering even before transformation occurs. The creature bears this burden because its trainer demands the power Mega Evolution provides. Trainer Stones, the companion items required for Mega Evolution, establish a direct link between trainer and creature. This link channels the creature's pain and rage during transformation, meaning trainers experience echoes of the suffering they inflict. Yet trainers continue Mega Evolving despite this feedback, suggesting either the shared pain is less than described or trainers prioritize victory over welfare. Certain creatures cannot Mega Evolve because they lack sufficient bond with their trainers. This requirement frames Mega Evolution as consensual partnership, but how much choice does a creature truly have? Refusing transformation might mean abandonment or replacement, making consent coerced rather than free. The discovery and distribution of megastones remains mysterious. These rare items appear in specific locations, sometimes requiring complex puzzles or challenges to obtain. The limited availability means most trainers cannot Mega Evolve their creatures, creating power disparities where the elite possess capabilities unavailable to common trainers. Artificial Mega Evolution, through different means, appears in some storylines, transformation forced through technological or chemical enhancement rather than natural bonding. These artificial methods produce even more unstable results, creatures twisted into grotesque forms that barely survive the process. Primal reversion, similar to Mega Evolution, but drawing on ancient power, transforms legendary creatures into their original forms. These reversions are described as returning creatures to their true nature, power no longer restrained by modern limitations. The implication is that legendaries in their base forms are deliberately weakened, sealed, or limited to prevent their full power from manifesting. Alternative evolution forms accessed through different methods show that creatures contain multiple potential transformations, each path permanently excluding others. Once a creature evolves in one direction, all other possibilities close forever. The permanence of these choices means that creatures are locked into paths chosen for them, unable to explore alternative developments. Regional variations in evolution create situations where creatures of the same species become completely different types depending on geography. This environmental influence suggests that creatures lack fixed natures, their development entirely dependent on external factors. The malleability of identity at such fundamental levels raises questions about what makes a creature essentially itself. Evolution stones that force immediate transformation override the creature's natural development schedule. A creature that might need more time to mature mentally before evolving, but stone evolution doesn't care about psychological readiness. The instant physical transformation leaves creatures in adult bodies with child minds, creating disconnect between physical form and mental development. Trait evolution, requiring creatures to experience the trauma of transfer before transforming, links growth explicitly to abandonment. The creature must be given away, experiencing rejection and loss before it can evolve. This condition suggests that emotional trauma serves as catalyst, that these species cannot develop without first experiencing pain. Friendship evolution requires high happiness, which sounds positive until one considers what happens when happiness drops. A creature one step from evolution that experiences trauma or neglect will fail to evolve, its development permanently delayed or halted. The fragility of happiness as evolution trigger means these creatures remain vulnerable to stagnation through misfortune. Location-based evolutions restrict certain transformations to specific geographical areas. Creatures that need special environmental conditions might never evolve if their trainers cannot reach those locations. These geographical restrictions trap creatures in unevolved states, their potential unrealized because of arbitrary location requirements. Time-based evolutions requiring specific times of day or night force trainers to schedule evolution attempts around clock time rather than creature readiness. A creature prepared to evolve, but leveled at the wrong time, will fail transformation, its biological development controlled by external temporal factors. Gender-based evolution creates situations where two creatures of the same species have completely different evolutionary potential. One gender reaches a powerful final form while the other dead ends at an earlier stage. This sexual dimorphism in evolutionary potential means that creatures are limited by factors beyond their control, biology determining destiny. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we encounter theories about fossil resurrection and the ethics of bringing extinct species back to life. The technology exists to revive creatures from preserved genetic material, restoring species extinct for millions of years. This power to reverse extinction sounds miraculous, but examination reveals concerning implications. Resurrected creatures return to a world completely different from the one they evolved for. Climate has changed, continents have shifted, ecosystems have evolved without them. These revived creatures are living fossils, beings out of time, struggling to exist in environments alien to their biology and instincts. The question of whether resurrected creatures are truly the same individuals that died millions ago or entirely new beings with ancient genetics remains unanswered. If consciousness doesn't transfer, then resurrection creates beings that appear identical to extinct species, but lack any continuity with the original creatures. They're copies rather than revivals. Some fossil creatures are described as having violent temperaments, aggressive predators that attack humans instinctively. These dangerous species exist because humans chose to resurrect them despite their danger, bringing threats back from extinction for research or novelty. The ethics of reviving dangerous extinct species purely because we can raises significant concerns. Fossil Pokémon in the wild suggest that either resurrection happened long ago and these creatures have established breeding populations, or that natural processes occasionally produce living fossils without human intervention. The former implies ancient resurrection technology, while the latter suggests extinction wasn't as complete as believed. The selection of which extinct species to revive appears arbitrary, based on which fossils players find, rather than any systematic survey of extinct biodiversity. This randomness means resurrection serves recreation rather than conservation, with cute or battle-worthy species prioritized over ecological importance. Limitations on fossil resurrection create situations where only certain extinct species can be revived. These limitations might be technological, or they might reflect deliberate choices about which extinct dangers should remain extinct. The criteria determining which extinct species deserve revival remain unexplored. Mixed fossil resurrection, combining pieces from different species, creates entirely new creatures that never naturally existed. These hybrid beings possess traits from multiple extinct species, living contradictions that evolution never produced. The games present these hybrids as scientific curiosities, but creating life forms that shouldn't exist raises profound ethical questions. The creators of resurrection technology wield power over extinction itself, deciding which species exist and which remain gone. This power makes them arbiters of biodiversity, with authority to reshape the world's fauna according to their preferences or capabilities. The centralization of such power in individual scientists creates vulnerability. Ancient creatures returning to modern ecosystems inevitably disrupt existing food webs and competition dynamics. A resurrected predator might drive modern prey species to extinction, or a resurrected herbivore might compete with modern creatures for resources. The ecological impacts of resurrection go completely unexamined in games. Some resurrection facilities operate commercially, selling revived creatures to trainers who provide fossil samples. This commercialization of resurrection treats extinct species as products, valued for their market appeal rather than their ecological roles. The commodification of life itself reduces creatures to transactions. Failed resurrection attempts presumably occur, genetic material too degraded, or contamination too severe for viable revival. These failures would produce malformed or non-viable creatures, suffering briefly before death. The games never show resurrection failures, but absence of failure in presentation doesn't mean absence of failure in reality. The long-term viability of resurrected populations remains questionable. With limited genetic diversity from few original samples, these populations face inbreeding and genetic bottlenecks. The species might exist technically, but their long-term survival is compromised by lack of genetic variation. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we encounter theories about the true nature of creature storage and whether creatures actually experience consciousness during storage. Official explanations remain deliberately vague, describing conversion to energy and comfortable digital environments without technical specifics. If creatures remain conscious during storage, the experience of existing as energy without physical form would be profoundly alien. All sensory input would cease, replaced by whatever digital environment the storage system provides. The creature would exist in a computer-generated space, unable to verify whether anything experienced is real. Storage for extended periods raises questions about psychological effects. A creature stored for weeks or months emerges without aging, suggesting time passes differently in storage. If subjective time matches external time, creatures experience imprisonment in digital isolation. If subjective time differs, creatures might experience minutes as years, or vice versa. The limit on stored creatures per trainer varies by game, but caps somewhere between several hundred and several thousand. This limit implies storage capacity isn't infinite, that the system has finite resources for maintaining digital creatures. What happens when capacity is reached? Are older creatures deleted to make room for newer ones? System maintenance and updates must occur in the digital storage infrastructure. During these maintenance windows, what happens to stored creatures? Are they backed up and restored, effectively dying and being recreated? Do they remain active during maintenance, aware of system operations around them? Storage system crashes or data corruption could delete stored creatures permanently, erasing them from existence. The games never depict such catastrophes, but complex systems inevitably fail eventually. The fragility of digital existence means creatures could be lost forever through technical failure beyond anyone's control. Hackers and criminals sometimes target creature storage systems, stealing stored creatures or holding them ransom. These digital kidnappings trap creatures in hostile systems, unable to escape or communicate their predicament. The victim trainers regain their creatures eventually, but what trauma did the creatures experience during captivity? Transfer between storage systems requires converting creatures from one format to another, updates to newer systems, or movement between regions with different technical standards. These conversions might be seamless, or they might introduce errors and artifacts. A creature transferred repeatedly might accumulate corruption, becoming degraded copies of originals. The original developers of storage technology possess knowledge and capabilities that have been lost or forgotten. Modern systems maintain infrastructure built generations ago, with current technicians unable to fully understand or repair the underlying code. This technological decay creates vulnerabilities as the system ages beyond its maintainers' understanding. Creatures stored during one era and retrieved decades later emerge to find the world completely changed. From their perspective, no time passed, but externally, years or decades elapsed. This temporal displacement would be disorienting, emerging into a world where everyone and everything has aged while the creature remained frozen. Wild creatures never enter storage systems, lacking the registration and tracking that domesticated creatures possess. This creates a divide between wild and domesticated populations, with different existential experiences. Wild creatures live and die naturally, while captured creatures exist in cycles of embodiment and digital storage. The existence of storage systems has fundamentally altered how humans interact with creatures. Before storage technology, humans couldn't carry armies of creatures wherever they went, couldn't swap teams instantly, couldn't maintain hundreds of creatures simultaneously. The technology enabled modern training culture, creating dynamics that wouldn't exist without it. Alternative storage methods appeared in some historical periods, physical containment rather than digital conversion. These primitive methods required significantly more space and resources, limiting how many creatures a trainer could maintain. The shift to digital storage removed these practical limits, enabling the current culture of mass capture and breeding. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we encounter theories about disease and how illness affects creatures differently than humans. The games rarely depict creatures suffering from disease, presenting injury as the primary health concern. But Pokédex entries occasionally reference diseases, suggesting threats beyond battle damage. Certain creatures are described as carriers of disease, vectors that spread illness to other creatures or humans. These plague carriers exist naturally, their infections not malicious, but evolutionary adaptations. Humans interacting with these creatures risk contracting diseases against which they have no immunity. Poison-type creatures produce toxins that range from mild irritants to lethal compounds. Some poisons cause immediate damage, while others work slowly, accumulating in victims over time. The variety of poisons means no single antidote works universally, each toxin requiring specific counteragents. One creature is explicitly stated to spread disease wherever it goes, its presence contaminating areas and sickening those nearby. This living plague vector cannot control its infectious nature, hurting others simply by existing. The ethical questions surrounding such a creature go unaddressed. Should it be isolated to protect others, or does it deserve freedom despite the harm it causes? Parasitic creatures that attach to hosts and drain resources appear in multiple forms. Some parasites are relatively benign, taking minimal resources while providing some benefit to hosts. Others are purely exploitative, weakening, or eventually killing hosts while providing nothing in return. One evolutionary line consists entirely of parasites, creatures that cannot exist independently and must attach to other living beings. The base form latches onto hosts subtly, while evolved forms control host behavior completely. The loss of autonomy as parasitic control strengthens makes these creatures particularly disturbing. Plant-based creatures sometimes spread spores that affect other creatures' behavior, hijacking neural systems to create zombies that serve the plant's reproductive needs. These mind-controlling spores represent a different kind of disease, one that removes free will while keeping the body functional. Certain ghost creatures are described as spreading illness through supernatural means, curses or miasma that sicken those nearby. These supernatural diseases can't be treated with conventional medicine, requiring spiritual or magical interventions instead. Evolution sometimes changes a creature's disease-carrying status. A relatively harmless base form might evolve into a disease vector, its new abilities or biological processes producing toxins or pathogens. This transformation means trainers might inadvertently create health hazards by evolving their creatures. Regional disease variants affect creatures in specific areas, endemic illnesses that local populations have developed resistance to, but visitors lack immunity against. Trainers traveling between regions risk exposing their creatures to diseases they've never encountered, potentially sparking epidemics. The lack of visible healthcare infrastructure for treating creature diseases suggests either that diseases rarely occur or that they're handled privately by individual trainers. The absence of creature hospitals, despite frequent battles, implies healing technology is sufficient for injuries, but disease might be different. Some Pokédex entries describe creatures that died from disease, establishing that illness can be fatal. These deaths occurred despite living in a world with advanced healing technology, suggesting either the diseases were too aggressive for treatment or that treatment wasn't available in time. Breeding creatures from different regions might create hybrid vigor or might introduce genetic vulnerabilities. Offspring of cross-regional breeding could be more resistant to diseases through diverse genetics, or they could be more susceptible through loss of region-specific adaptations. As we drift toward the end of this journey through darkness, it becomes clear that every theory explored reveals new questions, new implications, new shadows in the corners of the brightly lit Pokémon world. The darkness isn't always explicit, sometimes hiding in the implications of mechanics or the overlooked text of Pokédex entries. These theories persist across decades and generations because they address the uncomfortable questions that official sources leave unanswered. They acknowledge the suffering and exploitation that might exist beneath the cheerful surface, giving voice to concerns that don't fit the franchise's intended tone. The relationship between light and dark narratives creates a kind of dual experience where younger audiences enjoy adventure and friendship, while older audiences recognize disturbing implications. This layered storytelling, whether intentional or accidental, gives the franchise depth beyond simple children's entertainment. Official responses to dark theories range from silence to gentle deflection, rarely confirming or denying controversial interpretations. This ambiguity allows theories to flourish, growing more elaborate as each generation adds new material to analyze and interpret. The community's relationship with dark theories is complex, embracing them as interesting thought experiments while often acknowledging they probably don't reflect the creator's intentions. The theories exist in a space between analysis and creative reinterpretation, using game elements as foundation for darker narratives. Some darkness appears clearly intentional, moments where creators deliberately included unsettling elements for players who look closely. The Burned Tower's tragedy, the Ghost Girl encounters, certain Pokédex entries, these elements exist in the games and invite darker interpretation. Other darkness comes from applying real-world ethics and logic to game mechanics, finding horror in systems designed without deeper consideration. The storage system, the breeding mechanics, the battle system, these weren't designed to be disturbing, but examination from certain angles reveals uncomfortable implications. The persistence of theories about death, consciousness, and exploitation suggests that players seek meaning beyond the surface narrative. They want to understand the world's rules, to reconcile contradictions, to find logical explanations for mechanical conveniences. The distinction between theory and canon becomes blurred over time, with widely accepted theories treated as truth until officially contradicted. Gengar's relationship to Clefable, the legendary beast's origins, Ditto's connection to Mew, these theories achieve quasi-canonical status through community acceptance. New games sometimes reference or acknowledge popular theories, blurring the line between fan interpretation and official content. This acknowledgement can validate theories or can contradict them, but it always confirms that the creators are aware of how players interpret their work. The dark theories ultimately enrich the experience for those who engage with them, adding layers of complexity to what might otherwise be straightforward children's entertainment. They demonstrate that audiences bring their own perspectives and concerns to media, finding meaning that exists in the interaction between text and interpretation. As light fades and sleep approaches, the theories remain shadows that make the light more interesting by contrast. They remind us that every created world contains spaces for imagination, that gaps in narrative invite speculation, that communities build collective understandings that transcend original authorial intent. The Pokémon world continues expanding with each new release, adding new creatures, new mechanics, new regions. Each edition provides new material for theory crafting, ensuring that the community's relationship with darkness stays alive and evolving. The theories about type immunities and resistances reveal mechanical conveniences that break down under scrutiny. A ground-type creature takes no damage from electric attacks, described as electricity flowing into the earth harmlessly. But creatures aren't infinite electrical grounds. Their bodies have finite capacity for electrical absorption. A strong enough shock should overwhelm any natural resistance. Ghost creatures pass through physical objects, intangible to normal matter. Yet they can be captured in physical containment devices, struck by certain physical attacks, and affected by material barriers when convenient. This selective tangibility suggests that ghosts exist in a state between physical and spiritual, able to shift between states at will or according to unknown rules. Dragon-type creatures resist elements that should logically affect them. A creature made of flesh burns, drowns, or freezes like any living thing, yet dragon typing grants mystical resistance to these forces. The resistance implies that dragons aren't purely physical beings, that their type designation reflects metaphysical properties beyond simple biology. Fairy-type creatures demonstrate immunity to dragon-type attacks through mechanics that lore struggles to explain. The relationship between fairies and dragons in myth and legend provides thematic justification, but the physical mechanism remains mysterious. How does fairy-type essence negate dragon-type energy on a fundamental level? Dark-type immunity bestuxus. Psychic attacks suggest that dark minds cannot be read or influenced through mental powers. This protection implies that darkness represents a kind of mental shielding, thoughts that psychic powers cannot penetrate. The ethical implications of an entire type being immune to mental violation create interesting moral dimensions. Type matchups sometimes create ecological impossibilities when examined logically. A small fire-type creature shouldn't be able to harm a massive water type through type advantage alone, yet game mechanics allow tiny flames to threaten oceanic behemoths. The mechanical balance required for gameplay overrides realistic scaling of elemental interactions. Creatures that naturally possess multiple types demonstrate that the type system represents complex metaphysical reality rather than simple elemental classification. A creature that is simultaneously water and dark doesn't merely live in water or prefer darkness. It embodies both concepts simultaneously at a fundamental level. Type changes through evolution reveal that a creature's essential nature isn't fixed, but can fundamentally alter. A creature that is grass and poison in one stage becomes pure grass in the next, as if its toxic nature simply vanished. The metaphysical implications of such fundamental identity shifts raise questions about continuity of self. Regional variants that change a creature's type suggest that environment shapes essence at a deeper level than simple adaptation. A creature that is dark type in one region but psychic type in another hasn't just developed different traits, but has become fundamentally different in its metaphysical nature. Hidden abilities that some creatures possess, but others of the same species lack, indicate that individuals within species can differ at essential levels. Two creatures identical in appearance might have completely different fundamental natures, different relationships with reality itself expressed through their hidden abilities. Abilities that negate other abilities create paradoxes when both creatures possess negation powers. If one creature's ability prevents abilities from functioning and another's ability prevents ability prevention, which takes precedence? The games resolve these conflicts mechanically, but the philosophical questions about conflicting reality-altering powers remain. Whether changing abilities that transform entire battlefields demonstrate power on an environmental scale. A single creature can turn a sunny field into a raging storm, or blanket an area in hailstorm instantly. This weather manipulation suggests power that should have massive ecological impacts, yet the effects end when battle concludes as if nothing happened. Moves that change terrain transform the ground itself, creating fields of grass, mist, psychic energy, or other effects. These terrain changes affect multiple creatures simultaneously, altering the fundamental nature of physical space for the duration of their effect. The power to reshape reality on this scale seems too significant for individual creatures to possess. Some abilities function automatically and continuously, passive effects that require no conscious activation. A creature that automatically summons rain cannot turn this power off, existing in perpetual storm. The lack of control over such powerful abilities must be mentally taxing, awareness that simply existing alters the environment constantly. Abilities that harm the creature possessing them create evolutionary puzzles. Why would natural selection produce traits that damage their bearer? These self-harming abilities only make sense if their benefits outweigh their costs, but several abilities seem purely detrimental with no clear advantage. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we encounter theories about move mechanics and the implications of attacks that should be instantly lethal. A creature using an attack called guillotine literally attempts decapitation, yet on failure, the move does nothing, and on success, the target merely faints. The sanitized presentation of violent moves disguises their horrific reality. Self-destructing moves cause creatures to explode or collapse, using their life force as a final attack. These suicide techniques should leave the user dead, yet the games treat them as causing fainting like any other injury. The implication that creatures can explode violently and survive suggests either that creatures are far more resilient than physics allows, or that combat operates under rules that protect participants from true death. Draining moves that absorb life force or health from opponents represent a vampiric form of combat, stealing vitality to sustain the attacker. These energy-draining techniques should leave victims weakened or aged, yet effects disappear after battle, as if no transfer of life force occurred. Moves that badly poison targets inflict cumulative damage that grows worse over time, toxins spreading through the victim's system. This progressive poisoning should cause lasting harm or death if untreated, yet healing removes all traces instantly, as if the poison never existed. Paralysis that persists after battle creates situations where creatures remain unable to move properly even in non-combat situations. The paralyzed creature's daily life becomes severely impaired, simple movement requiring effort and coordination. The games rarely acknowledge these ongoing impairments, treating battle effects as self-contained. Burns that continue inflicting pain after battle end should require serious medical treatment, damaged flesh that needs time to heal. Instead, burns vanish instantly when healed, as if the damage existed only in some metaphysical battle space, rather than affecting physical bodies. Freezing solid should be fatal or cause permanent tissue damage from ice crystal formation in cells. Yet frozen creatures thaw with no lasting effects, resuming normal function immediately. This impossible recovery suggests either that freezing works differently in the Pokémon world, or that battle effects exist in a separate reality from permanent physical harm. Sleep-inducing moves that work instantly, regardless of target type or size, demonstrate power over consciousness itself. A sleep effect that can force an inorganic steel creature into unconsciousness suggests these aren't biological sleep, but rather metaphysical suspension of awareness. Confusion that causes creatures to hurt themselves represents loss of control so severe that self-preservation instincts fail. A confused creature might use powerful attacks on itself, causing serious harm through complete disorientation. The psychological trauma of such episodes goes unexamined. Attraction effects that make creatures infatuated represent emotional manipulation on a profound level. These artificially induced feelings override the creature's actual preferences and desires, replacing genuine emotion with manufactured attraction. The violations inherent in forced emotional states are treated as minor battle tactics. Moves that guarantee critical hits or ignore defensive stats demonstrate attacks that bypass normal physical laws. These certain hit techniques shouldn't exist in a world with consistent physics, yet they function reliably, suggesting combat operates under metaphysical rules beyond material reality. Priority moves that always strike first, regardless of speed, violate the temporal order of combat. A slower creature, using a priority move, attacks before a faster opponent can react, as if manipulating time itself. The mechanism allowing this temporal manipulation remains unexplained. Sound-based moves that affect even creatures that should be too large or too distant to be meaningfully impacted by vibrations suggest that these moves carry more than physical force. The sonic attacks must operate on metaphysical levels, sound as concept rather than merely vibration. Weather-dependent moves that change power based on environmental conditions tie attack strength to cosmic forces. A move that draws power from sunlight becomes impossibly strong under sunny skies, as if channeling solar energy directly into focused attack. Moves that vary in power randomly introduce chance into what should be skill-based combat. An attack might be devastating or weak based purely on luck, making combat outcomes partially random. This randomness suggests that reality itself contains inherent uncertainty that affects even practiced techniques. Recoil damage from powerful attacks that harm the user demonstrates that some techniques exceed the creature's ability to safely channel their power. These self-harming attacks trade the user's well-being for increased damage, a desperate gamble that acknowledges limits to what creatures can safely endure. Charging moves that require preparation time before unleashing full power create vulnerability windows where the attacker cannot defend. The need to gather energy or build momentum makes these techniques risky despite their power, tactical choices that balance the strength against exposure. Communication between humans and creatures represents another area where official explanations fail to satisfy scrutiny. Creatures understand human speech perfectly, following complex commands and responding to nuanced instructions. Yet most creatures cannot speak human languages, limited to repeating their species' names or producing cries. This one-way communication creates an imbalance where humans speak and creatures obey without ability to voice disagreement or ask questions. Psychic-type creatures demonstrate telepathic abilities, communicating thoughts directly to human minds. This mental contact proves creatures possess complex thoughts and sophisticated intelligence, yet they remain unable to translate these thoughts into speech. The disconnect between obvious intelligence and inability to communicate suggests either biological limitations or deliberate barriers preventing full dialogue. Some creatures do speak human languages fluently, demonstrating that the capacity exists within creature biology. These speaking creatures often possess psychic abilities or high intelligence, suggesting that speech requires mental capabilities most creatures lack. The rarity of speaking creatures implies that most exist below a threshold of intelligence required for language, a troubling thought given how intelligent even common creatures appear. Team Rocket's talking creature serves as evidence that training or modification can grant speech to creatures normally incapable. The method used to teach this creature language remains mysterious, described vaguely as self-taught through observation. If one creature can learn speech through exposure, why can't others? The uniqueness suggests either exceptional individual capability or intervention through methods the games never explain. Translation. Devices exist that convert creature speech into human language, implying that creatures speak complex languages that humans simply don't understand naturally. These devices reveal that creature cries contain meaning and structure, full languages compressed into sounds that seem simple to untrained human ears. The existence of these languages proves sophisticated thought, yet most trainers never bother learning to understand their creature's speech. The bond system that some games emphasize suggests emotional connection, strengthens trainer-creature relationships. But this bond operates on feelings rather than communication, creatures responding to their trainer's emotions without necessarily understanding their reasoning. A creature might love its trainer while disagreeing with their choices, forced to obey due to capture mechanics rather than genuine agreement. Creatures displayed in storage boxes show animations and expressions suggesting awareness and personality, yet they cannot escape or communicate their desires. These stored creatures exist in a state of permanent availability, unable to refuse when their trainer chooses to deploy them. The lack of autonomy reduces creatures to tools, possessions rather than partners, despite official emphasis on friendship. Wild creatures that flee from battle demonstrate self-preservation and fear, emotional responses that suggest they don't want to fight or be captured. Yet the games treat fleeing as frustration for trainers rather than acknowledging the creature's right to refuse interaction. The assumption that all creatures secretly want to be captured contradicts the evidence of creatures actively avoiding trainers. Some creature species are described as intelligent enough to use tools, form complex social structures, or create art. These demonstrations of sapience raise questions about the ethics of capture and training. If creatures possess intelligence comparable to humans, treating them as property becomes morally equivalent to slavery. The games avoid engaging with this comparison, despite presenting evidence that supports it. Certain legendary creatures are explicitly stated to possess intelligence, far exceeding human capability, ancient beings with perspectives spanning millennia. Capturing such beings and forcing them to battle at human command represents profound disrespect, reducing gods to servants. The legendary creature's willingness to be caught might reflect benevolence rather than weakness, choosing to humor humans rather than being genuinely captured. Creatures that evolve into more intelligent forms sometimes show personality changes, becoming more serious or more playful as their mental capabilities develop. These personality shifts raise questions about continuity of identity, whether the evolved creature is the same individual or a different person inhabiting the same body. The erasure of previous personality traits through evolution resembles death and replacement more than simple growth. Memory manipulation abilities allow certain creatures to alter or erase memories in humans and other creatures. The ethical implications of such power go unaddressed, with memory modification treated as convenient problem solving rather than violation of mental autonomy. Victims whose memories are altered live with false pasts, their identities constructed rather than genuine. Dream-eating creatures that enter sleeping minds and consume dreams demonstrate access to the most private mental spaces. The invasion of dreams represents violation of the last truly private realm, places where thoughts run free without external observation. A creature that feeds on dreams sees everything, every fear, every desire, every secret shame exposed during sleep. Creatures described as judges of human character, beings that can sense evil or good in people's hearts, possess moral authority that humans don't. These judgments cannot be appealed or questioned, creatures deciding humans' worth based on criteria that might not align with human ethical systems. The power to categorize humans as good or evil based on instinct or supernatural sense creates a hierarchy where creatures sit in judgment of their supposed trainers. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we encounter theories about economics and how creatures factor into the financial systems of their world. Currency in the Pokémon world appears to have value based on unclear backing, with trainers earning money through battles and spending it on items and services. The source of this value remains mysterious, raising questions about its economic foundation. Defeated trainers pay winners immediately after battle, a system that requires all trainers to carry significant cash at all times. This universal payment obligation suggests cultural norms around battle that treat contests as binding financial agreements. The automatic nature of these payments implies either honor systems or enforcement mechanisms that ensure defeated trainers pay up. Some trainers are explicitly described as wealthy or poor, creating economic classes within the training community. Wealthy trainers can afford better items, more healing supplies, and access to resources that improve their creatures. This financial advantage translates to competitive advantage, with poor trainers limited by resources rather than skill. Rare items command high prices, creating markets where certain goods are accessible only to the wealthy. Evolution stones, healing items, and held items all require purchase, with prices ranging from affordable to prohibitive. The market system ensures that not all trainers have equal access to tools that could improve their creature's performance. Creature trading sometimes involves monetary exchange, trainers buying and selling creatures like commodities. This commercialization of living beings creates markets where creatures are valued by their battle capabilities, rarity, or aesthetic appeal. The reduction of creatures to tradable assets strips away any pretense that they're partners rather than property. Breeding operations run as businesses, facilities that produce and sell creatures to trainers willing to pay. These commercial breeding programs treat creatures as inventory, products to be marketed and sold. The profit motive driving these operations prioritizes desirable traits over individual creature well-being, optimizing for market demand rather than creature happiness. Contest halls and battle facilities charge entry fees, creating pay-to-participate systems that exclude poor trainers. These financial barriers mean that opportunities for advancement and recognition require wealth, creating hierarchies where poor trainers remain locked out of prestigious venues. Gym leaders and league members presumably receive payment for their roles, salaries that come from government or organizational budgets. The funding sources for these salaries remain unclear, raising questions about whether trainers pay taxes or whether the league system operates as self-funded through entry fees and commercial ventures. Certain regions feature casinos where trainers gamble with coins or currency, systems designed to extract money from participants. These gambling establishments operate openly, suggesting either legalization of gambling or weak enforcement against it. The presence of minors in casinos raises additional concerns about age restrictions and protection of young trainers. Black markets exist where illegal items and creatures trade hands, underground economies that operate outside official channels. These black markets suggest that regulation exists but is imperfect, with demand for prohibited goods creating criminal enterprises. The nature of items sold on black markets ranges from restricted evolution stones to captured creatures taken by theft. Some creatures are described as treasured for materials they produce, scales, fur, or secretions that have value. This resource extraction from creatures creates industries based on creature harvesting, with wild populations potentially threatened by demand for their products. The ethics of harvesting materials from intelligent beings receive no examination. Insurance for creatures exists in some regions, systems that compensate trainers for lost or injured creatures. The existence of creature insurance implies that loss and injury happen frequently enough to justify insurance markets, a grim reminder that creature ownership carries risks that trainers seek to mitigate financially. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we encounter theories about the true purpose of gyms and the league system. Official presentation frames these as testing grounds for trainers and their creatures, places to prove skill and earn recognition. But examination reveals possible, darker purposes. Gym leaders maintain their positions for years or decades, defending their gyms against countless challengers. This permanent station suggests that gym leadership isn't merely honorary, but rather a full-time occupation with serious responsibilities. What exactly are gym leaders defending against? The requirement that trainers defeat 8 gym leaders before accessing the league creates a filtering system that ensures only capable trainers progress. This filter prevents weak trainers from facing the Elite Four, but it also prevents them from accessing whatever lies beyond the league. What exists at the end of the championship path that requires such stringent access control? Gym leaders sometimes specialize in types that are common in their local area, as if their role involves managing local creature populations. A water gym near the coast or a grass gym in a forest suggests that leaders serve as regulatory forces, ensuring that local ecosystems remain balanced. The League's position at the end of Victory Road, a dangerous cave filled with powerful wild creatures, creates a natural barrier that augments the badge requirement. The physical isolation means that only trainers capable of surviving the journey can reach the League, adding geographical challenge to the skill requirements. Elite Four members remain in the League building perpetually, waiting for challengers who rarely come. This isolation from normal society suggests either dedication bordering on obsession or imprisonment disguised as honor. What keeps these powerful trainers locked in their roles rather than pursuing their own journeys? The champion's role involves waiting for challengers while maintaining readiness to defend their title. This perpetual vigilance means the champion never truly rests, always one challenger away from losing their position. The psychological pressure of this constant threat must be enormous. Defeated champions sometimes disappear from public view entirely, no longer appearing in accessible locations. This vanishing suggests either shame so profound they withdraw from society, or that former champions serve new roles that require absence from public spaces. Some regions feature champion-level trainers who don't hold official champion titles, suggesting that strength alone doesn't guarantee championship. These powerful trainers exist outside the formal system, perhaps by choice, or perhaps because the system excludes them for unknown reasons. Gym redesigns and leader replacements happen occasionally, with new leaders taking over from predecessors who step down or move on. The transfer of gym leadership suggests an organizational structure above individual leaders, some system that assigns and removes gym leaders according to criteria beyond player observation. Failed challengers who lose to gym leaders presumably return to training or give up on their journeys. The games never follow these failures, but statistically, most trainers must fail at some gym and never advance further. These abandoned dreams accumulate, trainers who gave up scattered throughout regions. The badge system itself represents both achievement and restriction, tokens that prove capability but also gate access to resources and areas. Trainers without appropriate badges face limits on which creatures will obey them and which areas they can explore, creating a hierarchy where the badgeless remain restricted. Some areas require specific badges for access, using the badge system as literal keys rather than mere proof of competence. This geographical restriction suggests that dangerous areas must be kept from untrained trainers, protecting them from threats they cannot handle. Hidden machines that teach powerful moves require specific badges before they can be used outside combat. This restriction prevents trainers from accessing certain capabilities until they've proven themselves, ensuring that powerful field moves don't fall into unprepared hands. The League system exists across multiple regions with similar structures, suggesting either independent development of identical systems or a shared standard established by some overarching authority. The consistency across regions implies coordination at levels beyond individual regional governments. Inter-regional travel requires passing through security checkpoints and customs, even for trained trainers with recognized credentials. This border control suggests that regions maintain some separation, that free movement isn't automatic even for accomplished trainers. Some regions remain inaccessible through normal means, requiring special transportation or permissions that most trainers never obtain. These isolated regions might be protected for ecological reasons, or they might contain threats that justify restricted access. The artificial creation of creatures through scientific means extends beyond the famous genetic experiment to numerous less publicized cases. Facilities across multiple regions have developed technology for creating life, assembling creatures from base components or modifying existing species into new forms. These laboratories operate with varying degrees of oversight, some government-sanctioned while others work in shadows. One creature explicitly exists as a digital entity, life composed entirely of code and data rather than biological matter. The programmers who created this digital consciousness succeeded in producing genuine intelligence, thoughts and feelings emerging from algorithms and mathematics. Whether digital consciousness is equivalent to biological consciousness remains philosophically unresolved, but the creature's ability to feel pain and experience emotions suggests it possesses some form of genuine awareness. The transition from digital to physical form through downloads and uploads treats consciousness as transferable data, information that can be copied between substrates. If consciousness is merely data, then copying a creature creates a duplicate consciousness, two beings with identical memories and personalities. The games never address whether copied consciousnesses are the same individual or separate entities, leaving questions about identity and continuity unanswered. Artificial creatures designed as weapons exist in multiple forms, beings created specifically for combat rather than through natural evolution. These war machines possess abilities optimized for destruction, bodies built to withstand damage and deliver punishment. The creation of living weapons represents the militarization of life itself, turning biology into armament. Some artificial creatures are described as mistakes or failures, experiments that didn't work as intended. These failed creations exist in perpetual discomfort, bodies that don't function properly, or minds that cannot find peace. The creators of these failures bear responsibility for lives filled with suffering, yet no accountability system exists for scientists who create and abandon malformed creatures. Cloning technology produces identical copies of existing creatures, duplicates that share genetics and often memories with their originals. The philosophical questions surrounding clone identity receive no attention. Games treating clones as separate individuals without exploring whether they possess continuity with the beings they're copied from. A creature cloned from a trained individual might inherit the original's memories, awakening into existence with someone else's past. Enhancement through technological modification creates cyborg creatures, biological beings with mechanical additions or replacements. These enhanced creatures blur the line between living organism and machine, possessing capabilities that natural biology cannot support. The modification process requires surgery and integration of foreign components, procedures that must be painful and psychologically disturbing. Some creatures are described as being completed or finalized through technological intervention, suggesting that their natural forms are incomplete. This framing of natural creatures as drafts requiring technological finishing implies that biology is inherently imperfect, that only through human intervention can creatures reach their true potential. The arrogance of such thinking treats natural evolution as inferior to designed modification. Genetic splicing that combines DNA from multiple species creates hybrid creatures with traits from various origins. These chimeric beings possess no natural evolutionary history, their genomes assembled from different sources according to designer preference. The long-term stability of such hybrid genetics remains unknown, with potential for genetic disorders or systemic failures as incompatible genes interact in unforeseen ways. The facilities that perform genetic modification operate with different ethical standards, some attempting to minimize suffering, while others prioritize results regardless of cost to test subjects. The variation in ethics creates Situations where identical experiments might be conducted humanely in one facility and cruelly in another, with no universal standards protecting creature subjects. Failed genetic experiments presumably are destroyed or locked away, mistakes too dangerous or too malformed to release. These failures exist in laboratories or containment facilities, living evidence of experimental errors. The suffering of failed experiments receives no consideration in the pursuit of successful creations, their pain dismissed as acceptable cost of scientific progress. Some creatures are described as having unstable genetics, species that can change type or form in response to environmental factors. This genetic instability might be natural evolutionary adaptation or the result of ancient genetic modification, early experiments, whose effects persist in modern populations. The instability creates unpredictability, creatures whose fundamental nature might shift unexpectedly. Cloning extinct species from ancient DNA samples requires filling gaps in degraded genetic sequences using modern creature DNA to complete the genome. The resulting clones are therefore not pure ancient creatures, but hybrids of ancient and modern genetics. These resurrections are approximations rather than exact reproductions, close enough to function but not truly identical to the originals. The ownership and control of genetic material raises questions about intellectual property in life itself. If a corporation develops a new creature through genetic engineering, do they own the species? Can they control reproduction and distribution of beings they created? The commercialization of life through genetic patents treats creatures as products subject to ownership and licensing. Some creatures are described as prototypes or experimental models, language that frames living beings as iterations in design processes. These prototype creatures exist as proof of concept, demonstrations that specific genetic modifications work as intended. Their lives serve technical purposes rather than being valued for their own sake, existing solely to prove experimental theories. The long-term consequences of releasing genetically modified creatures into wild populations remain unknown. Modified genetics spreading through breeding could alter wild populations irreversibly, introducing designed traits into natural evolution. The contamination of wild populations with laboratory genetics represents permanent change to ecosystems, modifications that cannot be undone once dispersed. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we encounter theories about ancient civilizations and what happened to them. Multiple regions contain ruins of advanced societies, structures, and technology that modern inhabitants cannot replicate. These lost civilizations possessed knowledge and capabilities that have vanished, leaving only abandoned cities and inactive machinery. One ancient civilization developed technology for controlling legendary creatures, devices that could summon and command beings of immense power. The civilization's eventual destruction might be related to this attempt to control forces beyond mortal authority, legendary creatures turning on their would-be masters. The ruins remain as warnings, testaments to the dangers of hubris. Another ancient culture appears to have achieved harmony with creatures, coexistence so complete that humans and creatures functioned as single, integrated society. The collapse of this civilization suggests that even successful integration can fail, that the peace between species can shatter. What caused the dissolution of this harmonious culture remains mysterious, with theories ranging from natural disaster to internal conflict. Sealed chambers in ancient ruins contain creatures that have been imprisoned for millennia, beings too dangerous to kill, but too powerful to allow freedom. These ancient seals weaken over time, requiring periodic renewal or reinforcement. The knowledge of how to properly maintain these seals has been partially lost. with modern inhabitants working from incomplete instructions to prevent catastrophic releases. Some ruins contain evidence of advanced weaponry, devices designed to destroy creatures or devastate landscapes. These ancient weapons suggest warfare on scales not seen in modern times, conflicts that destroyed entire civilizations. The deactivated weapons remain in ruins, dormant threats that could potentially be reactivated by those who understand their mechanisms. Wall carvings and murals in ruins depict relationships between humans and creatures different from modern dynamics. Some show creatures as equals or even superiors to humans, societies where creatures held authority over human populations. Other murals depict humans and creatures as merged beings, hybrids or fusions that combine both species into single entities. Ancient texts found in ruins sometimes reference creatures that don't exist in modern times, species that have gone extinct or transformed beyond recognition. These extinct creatures might have been powerful enough to threaten civilizations, their disappearance explaining why ancient cultures fell. Alternatively, the creatures might have been casualties of whatever catastrophes destroyed the civilizations. Technology for transforming humans into creatures appears in some ancient texts, procedures, or rituals that could cross species boundaries. Whether these transformation tales are literal truth or mythological allegory remains unclear, but their consistent appearance across multiple ancient cultures suggests some basis in reality. Modern attempts to replicate these transformations have failed or been abandoned, the knowledge required lost to time. Prophecies carved in ancient ruins sometimes reference future catastrophes, warnings about events yet to occur. These prophecies mention legendary creatures awakening, regions being destroyed, or civilizations falling into darkness. The accuracy of past prophecies that have come true lends credibility to unfulfilled predictions, suggesting that known future disasters wait in the timeline ahead. Some ancient structures appear designed as prisons or containment facilities, architecture optimized for keeping something locked inside. The sheer scale and redundancy of these containment structures suggests they held entities of tremendous power, beings that required massive infrastructure to restrain. What these facilities contained and whether they still function properly remains uncertain. Connections between ruins in different regions suggest that ancient civilizations were more interconnected than modern societies, with trade routes and communication networks spanning vast distances. The global nature of these ancient cultures implies they possess transportation or communication technology superior to current methods. The loss of this technology represents a regression, modern civilization less advanced in some ways than its ancient predecessors. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we encounter theories about dimension travel and alternate realities. Several creature species are described as originating from other dimensions, beings that crossed into this world through rifts or portals. These interdimensional creatures adapted to local reality or remained partially out of sync with normal space. Portals to alternate dimensions appear naturally in some locations, unstable tiers in reality that allow movement between worlds. These naturally occurring portals fluctuate in stability and location, sometimes accessible and other times sealed. Creatures that wander through from other dimensions become trapped if portals close, stranded in realities not their own. Ultraspace represents a specific alternate dimension, a realm with different physical laws and native species. The creatures from ultraspace demonstrate biology impossible under this dimension's physics, bodies that violate thermodynamics or exist in quantum superposition. Their presence in this dimension suggests they operate under different fundamental constants, reality itself working differently in their home space. Human travel to alternate dimensions sometimes results in time dilation, with travelers experiencing hours while years pass in their home dimension. This temporal distortion means that dimensional explorers return to find their world changed, friends and family aged while they remained young. The psychological impact of such temporal displacement receives minimal attention despite being potentially devastating. Alternate timelines branch from moments of significant choice, creating parallel worlds where different decisions led to different outcomes. The existence of these parallel timelines raises philosophical questions about fate and free will, whether choices matter if all possibilities exist simultaneously. Some theories suggest that timeline branches can merge or collapse, erasing entire alternate realities along with everyone in them. Creatures capable of perceiving multiple dimensions simultaneously exist in a state of sensory overload, experiencing overlapping realities at once. This multidimensional perception grants knowledge of alternate possibilities, but makes focusing on any single reality difficult. The mental strain of existing across dimensions would be immense, consciousness pulled in multiple directions by conflicting realities. Mirror dimensions that reflect this world in reversed or inverted form sometimes connect to normal reality, creating situations where travelers can meet alternate versions of themselves. These mirror encounters force individuals to confront paths not taken, lives they might have lived if circumstances differed. The existence of mirror selves raises questions about identity and whether the self is singular or merely one expression of infinite possibilities. Dimensional barriers thin in certain locations or during specific astronomical alignments, moments when crossing between worlds becomes easier. These weak points attract creatures and energies from other dimensions, creating areas of dimensional instability where reality behaves unpredictably. Inhabitants of these areas report strange phenomena, objects appearing or disappearing, time running wrong, or physics behaving inconsistently. Some legendary creatures are described as guardians of dimensional boundaries, beings whose role involves preventing unauthorized crossings between realities. These guardians possess the power to seal or open portals, controlling traffic between dimensions according to criteria only they understand. The concentration of such power in individual creatures creates single points of failure, with reality's stability dependent on these guardians maintaining their vigilance. Corruption or contamination from other dimensions sometimes affects areas where barriers are weak, reality itself becoming infected with foreign physics or biology. These contaminated zones operate under mixed rules, some aspects following normal physics, while others obey the laws of invading dimensions. Creatures that spend too long in contaminated zones risk being altered by foreign reality, their biology adapting to accommodate contradictory physical laws. Technology for artificially creating dimensional portals exists but remains unstable and dangerous, with failed experiments occasionally tearing permanent holes in reality. These permanent rifts leak energy and entities from other dimensions continuously, creating ongoing contamination that spreads from the breach point. Closing these rifts requires power comparable to their creation, meaning some permanent portals might exist simply because no one possesses sufficient strength to seal them. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we encounter theories about consciousness transfer and what it means for identity. The storage system converts creatures into energy and back, a process that might break down and rebuild consciousness with each use. If consciousness is destroyed and recreated each time a creature enters and exits storage, then the being that emerges is a copy rather than the original, with no continuity of experience. Trait evolution that requires transfer between trainers might create situations where consciousness is duplicated during transmission. If the sending device maintains a copy while transmitting another to the receiving device, then briefly two versions of the consciousness exist simultaneously. When the sending device deletes its copy to complete the transfer, one version of the consciousness dies, while the other continues, unaware of its duplicate's death. Fusion techniques that combine two creatures into a single being raise horrifying questions about where the original consciousnesses go. Do they merge into a hybrid consciousness, or does one dominate while the other is suppressed? The fusion process might create something entirely new that merely contains memories from both originals, two deaths masked as transformation. Some creatures are described as possessing multiple consciousnesses, several minds inhabiting a single body. These multi-minded beings must coordinate their separate thoughts and desires, potentially experiencing internal conflict when different consciousnesses disagree. The experience of sharing existence with other minds in the same body would be psychologically complex, identity fragmented across multiple simultaneous perspectives. Soul-splitting creatures that can divide their consciousness across multiple bodies exist in a state of distributed identity, one being spread across several locations. The death of one body might not kill the consciousness if others survive, creating a kind of immortality through redundancy. However, the experience of existing in multiple places simultaneously must be disorienting, sensory input and action across several bodies requiring processing that strains comprehension. Memory transfer abilities that allow creatures to implant thoughts or experiences in others' minds create situations where people carry memories of events they never experienced. These false memories feel genuine to the recipient, indistinguishable from real memories of actual events. The contamination of memory with implanted experiences erodes the foundation of personal identity, which relies on continuity of remembered experience. Possession that allows one consciousness to override another creates a horrifying loss of bodily autonomy, passengers trapped in their own flesh while something else controls their actions. Victims of possession remain aware during the experience, unable to move or speak independently. The violation of being worn like a puppet must be psychologically traumatic, yet games treat possession as temporary inconvenience rather than profound assault. Dream-sharing abilities that connect multiple consciousnesses in shared dream space create vulnerability where private thoughts become accessible to others. These shared dreams might reveal secrets or desires the dreamer wishes to keep hidden, exposure of the subconscious to external observation. The invasion of dream space represents violation of the last truly private realm of consciousness. Hive mind creatures that share thoughts across all members of their species exist without individual privacy, every thought known to every other member. This collective consciousness might provide comfort of never being alone, or it might be nightmarish loss of personal mental space. Individual identity becomes questionable when thoughts are shared universally, the boundaries between self and other dissolving in shared mind space. Consciousness backup systems that some advanced facilities use could restore minds after physical death, uploading stored thought patterns into new bodies. These restoration processes raise questions about whether restored consciousness is the same person or a copy that believes itself to be the original. The philosophical distinction between resurrection and replication remains unresolved. As we drift toward the conclusion of this journey, the accumulated darkness creates a portrait of the Pokémon world more complex and troubling than official sources acknowledge. Every bright adventure casts shadows. Every friendship implies potential exploitation. Every victory raises questions about cost. The theories persist, because they address elements that exist in the games but remain unexplored by official narratives. The demographic anomalies, the unsettling Pokédex entries, the mechanical implications, these exist in the source material, not as a player invention, but as observable facts open to interpretation. Some darkness appears clearly intentional, moments where creators deliberately included unsettling elements for observant players. The ghost girls, the haunted, towers, certain legendary backstories. These elements exist to create atmosphere and depth, to hint at complexity beneath the cheerful surface. Other darkness emerges from applying adult perspectives to mechanics designed for children, finding horror in systems that weren't meant to bear serious scrutiny. The storage system, the breeding mechanics, the hierarchy of obedience, these weren't designed to be disturbing, but examination reveals implications their creators might not have considered. The relationship between official narrative and fan interpretation creates a space where both can exist simultaneously. Young players enjoy adventure and friendship, while older players recognize darker implications, with each group finding different meanings in the same material. The community's embrace of dark theories demonstrates a desire for depth and complexity, for narratives that acknowledge difficulty and moral ambiguity. Players want worlds that feel real enough to contain genuine darkness, not sanitized fantasies where every question has comfortable answers. New installments in the franchise sometimes reference or acknowledge popular theories, blurring the line between fan interpretation and official content. These acknowledgments validate certain theories while contradicting others, creating a dialogue between creators and audience. The evolution of theory crafting shows a community actively engaged with its media, not passively consuming, but actively interpreting and reinterpreting. Each new game provides new material to analyze, new darkness to uncover, new questions to ask. The dark theories ultimately enrich the experience for those who engage with them, adding layers of complexity to what might otherwise feel shallow. They demonstrate that audiences bring themselves to media, that interpretation matters, that meaning emerges from interaction between text and reader. The creatures themselves become more tragic when viewed through the lens of these theories, beings caught in systems they didn't create and cannot escape. Their capacity for suffering becomes evident once one looks past the game mechanics to imagine actual experience, actual lives lived in service to human ambitions. The trainers who dedicate themselves to understanding these darker possibilities often develop more ethical relationships with their creatures, awareness of potential exploitation, leading to more careful consideration of creature welfare. The theories serve a practical purpose beyond intellectual exercise, making players think more deeply about their actions and their impact on the digital lives under their control. As light fades and sleep approaches, the theories remain permanent shadows in the corners of a brightly lit world. They remind us that every story contains potential darkness, that innocence and horror can occupy the same space, that questions can matter more than answers. The Pokémon world will continue expanding, each new generation adding new creatures, new regions, new mysteries. With each edition comes new material for theory crafting, ensuring that the community's relationship with darkness remains alive and evolving. The theories will persist as long as curious minds seek deeper meaning, as long as players look beyond the surface and ask uncomfortable questions about the worlds they love. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed drifting through these quiet moments, there's another video waiting on the left of your screen. Let it play while you rest. You might discover something gentle before sleep takes you.